Now I have the great pleasure of introducing our very esteemed guest speaker, and I just need to bring up my screen. So I'm very privileged to have Dr. Rhonda Galbally AC speaking with us today on her critical role as a Commissioner of the Royal Commission into Violence, Abuse, Neglect and Exploitation of People with Disability. Dr. Galbally has been a CEO, chair and board member for over 30 years across the business and not-for-profit sectors, the public sector and philanthropy. As a woman with lifelong disability, Dr. Galbally first began her work in disability rights and policy in the early 1980s, with a career spanning many decades and positions at the highest levels. Dr. Galbally considers that a highlight was developing the National Disability and Carer Alliance that brought together people with disabilities, families and carers with services to campaign for the National Disability Insurance Scheme by developing the Every Australian Counts campaign. As a Commissioner of the Disability Royal Commission, Dr. Galbally drew on her expertise across the major interfacing service systems, including health, education, justice, and housing. Her work was aided by her commitment to listening to and working with people with disabilities in fighting for their human right to live fully in the community without fear of violence, abuse, neglect, and exploitation. So thank you, Rhonda, for your incredible work and advocacy for the disability community. We are so honoured to have you here today.
Thank you very much, Karen. I appreciate that introduction. And I'd like to start by paying my respects to the traditional owners of the land on which I'm coming to you from, and that's the Wurundjeri people in Victoria, and to their elders past and present and the emerging leaders. I really pay respects. So I wanted to start by saying that, first of all, the Royal Commission would not have taken place without WWDA. So what an absolutely vital contribution this organisation's made to the prevention of violence, abuse, neglect and exploitation by fighting to get the establishment of the Royal Commission. So I wanted to start by thanking you very much for that. The second thing is that WWDA put in loads of submissions to the Royal Commission on their own behalf, but also they then rallied the whole sector and put in some very important joint submissions, and one of them I'm going to come back to. So incredible work over the life of the Commission. And again, a lot of the recommendations that you've made in your submission, while you might be a bit disappointed that the Royal Commission didn't go far enough, I can assure you that they went much further than they would have without your submissions. So that's another way to look at that. You know, I was thinking of restrictive practices and supported decision-making and guardianship and all of those submissions, reproductive rights, very, very important, that I really, really can honestly say to you, I'm quite sure these issues wouldn't have been addressed as fully as they have been without you, while acknowledging the fact that you would have liked them to have gone further. The Royal Commission's report recommends a very important area that the WWDA have had a great deal of contribution to make on the world stage, and that's the CRPD and the recommendation that a Disability Rights Act, and I don't think it's whether it's a Disability Rights Act or a Human Rights Act that is on the table is the issue. The WWDA contribution is that it has to reflect the full and proper implementation of the CRPD, whatever the vehicle, whether it's a standalone act or the Human Rights Act, your contribution has been to really push to say that the CRPD has to be enacted into federal law and into state laws so that there will be human rights in all the areas that are part of the CRPD. And that's taking account of the interpretations with the general comments. And also while I'm at it, I just need to thank you again for the work you've done on, the developmental way the CRPD has rolled out, where over the course of time, the general comments have been very significant. So I think that's a really important part of the Commission's report, but that your position, which is full enactment, none of this qualification of that you want the full enactment is really important. The governance recommendations for a minister, for a commission, a disability commission, those recommendations, again, what are they for? It's no good having them if they're not for something. And again, you've articulated that really well. They're for the full enactment of the CRPD. And so that the struggle that WWDA had, where you did an enormous amount of work on the Australian Disability Strategy, where you certainly wanted it to reflect the CRPD, that should not even be a question in the future if we have a new act and if we have the governance that's underneath it. So I'm outlining a view that unfortunately, now that the Royal Commission's reported and there are all these possibilities, you're still needed fully. You can't possibly, it wouldn't be possible without you to make sure that the Act and the governance is around the CRPD and the rolling out of that. The other area that I really wanted to contribute to today in describing it for you is that you led a really major submission to the Royal Commission, which was on phasing out segregation, a really important submission that brought the whole sector together. It was the first time in the history of Australia that the whole sector had come together. And I know full well the work that WWDA, and of course, I must mention at this stage, and I should have earlier, that Carolyn Fromiter has been absolutely critical to all of this work. And I send her my very best wishes and thank her very, very deeply from my heart, because while the Commission's not perfect, I can imagine, in your eyes, it's still the value that's in it has come from a lot of that work, I can tell you. So thank you so much, Carolyn, and especially for the submission on segregation and the need for segregation to go. And so you will note from the volume 7 in the Commission's report, I've got a box of volume 7s down my garage because I like giving them out, because it sort of reflects the incredible struggle in some ways, without going into detail, that was within the Commission. But there we have it. So we have at least a reasonably detailed plan for phasing out segregated education, and at the same time for building inclusive education, not just thinking that children should go into schools that don't accept them and that bully them and that, you know, don't let them come anyway for a full week, all the terrible things that can happen to students with disability. But in the phasing out over a period of time, and the building up of the numbers of inclusive schools, you know, as a work in progress. It will be a work in progress. And we've allowed a good deal of time for this, which we've been criticised for. And, you know, if it could be done sooner, then that would be excellent. But it's vital it is done, because the data modelling that the Commission put out publicly right towards the end of the process showed that, of course, if you go to a special school, your chance of leading a segregated life as an adult for your whole life is 85% greater. So that segregation in childhood has dire consequences for your capacity to really participate in the Australian community as a full citizen. So it's very, very important, the education part of that volume. The second area that's in that volume that I'm hoping you'll all have a look at is, again, the phasing out ultimately of group homes as hotbeds of violence, abuse, neglect and exploitation. And it's sort of in two bits. There's a whole section on what I call the reform of group homes, where the question is, what could you do with a group home to make life far less dangerous for people who live in them, but also far more participatory in the wider community. So there are a number of sections in there, like the separation of the tenancy, where you can choose your own support workers, where you can choose who you live with, where you have security of tenancy in the group home and you can't be pushed out. So there's lots of reform suggestion. But then there is the recommendation to phase out group homes altogether, because we had the fear that they would go back, that the momentum takes them back to, you know, a dangerous situation, that would, with all the reforms in the world, it won't necessarily safeguard the people in them. And with all the safeguard and quality recommendations in the world, the question we asked ourselves is this model fit for purpose, where it isn't really a home, it's a workplace for support workers? And we said, no, it isn't fit for purpose. It needs to be phased out. And at the same time, all the 40 different ways of living that we've outlined a few of them, but there are many more that need to be worked on. We've recommended the development of a roadmap and the ultimate in 15 years, the phasing out of group homes. And the third area that we go into detail about, all linking back to your submission on segregation. So the third area is the phasing out of ADEs, of sheltered workshops. We recommend all of us together that the minimum wage will be paid to people, that'll go to half immediately, and then it'll go to a full minimum wage. But at the same time, 4 of us out of 6 are recommending that ADEs are phased out in their current model. And, you know, if they want to continue in any model, they have to become organisations where half their workforce, half non-disabled people, so they're not segregated any longer, and where they pay minimum wages. And that's called, we've called that a social firm based on the models from around the world. And to be frank with you, I don't really know why AGEs haven't moved to that model already. A couple have, but by and large they haven't. They've dug their heels in. And so we're recommending that that's the model to phase in if they want to stay in business at all. But they have to pay award wages, and they have to be inclusive workplaces with half people without disabilities, so they're no longer segregated. So I've got I know you've got your annual meeting to get on with, and you wanted me to be brief and snappy. I just sort of, before I stop though, I did want to just go through this astonishing list, you know, of really the formal submissions that you made to the DRC. And I wanted to end on that note. I mean, they range from accessibility strategy when we were first establishing so that people with disabilities of all kinds would be able to participate in the Royal Commission. That was a WWDA submission. You know, you made submissions on education and learning, on emergency planning, and all with a women focus, all looking at women and girls and making sure they're not forgotten, as they often are, which is, you know, your history, why we so badly need a WWDA. You made a submission, as I mentioned earlier, on guardianship and substitute decision-making, which was a very, very important submission to the Commission. I've talked about the paper on segregation, the joint position that you were very much a part of driving. The promoting inclusions, quality and safeguards, reproductive justice for young people, really important, restrictive practices, sexual and reproductive rights, the status of women with disability. Because of WWDA, there was a separate hearing on women and girls. I'm quite sure that wouldn't have happened without WWDA, and that was a vital hearing, very important. Violence in the home. So it goes on, recognising and respecting our rights. Young women, feminine identifying and non-binary young people with a disability, very important. And all of these are available, and they're all towards reproductive justice for young women. And then, of course, you drove together for there to be a COVID statement too from the whole sector, which I think was also very important. So they're just some. That's not a comprehensive reading out of the list. And in conclusion, when I read your history, which I found very interesting, and saw how you struggled back in the 80s with the male dominating Disability People's International, where women weren't even supported to go to conferences or participate, where men were, where women weren't able to go on the governance body that was dominated by men. And that finally in 1994, you left after setting up a national women's network. You then left and set up your own organisation. And thank goodness you did. Thank goodness you didn't lie down and take it, this absolute profound discrimination. I'm so grateful to you that you did that. And such an important thing to stand up for women and to really fight for them and to participate in all sorts of forums, nothing to do with disability, where you take women with disabilities into the generic forums on violence and health and all sorts of other issues, where you really keep plugging away that women with disabilities are vital and very discriminated against and deserve, huge recognition. And so I'd like to end by thanking you very much. The Royal Commission's work has only just begun, in that if we want the recommendations that we've made to get up, now's the time to really fight for that. And I know that WWDA are in the midst of that already. And again, thank you. So thank you so much, Karen, and thank you, Carolyn, and thank you to all the women at WWDA and all your supporters too. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhonda.
Thank you so much, Rhonda, for your amazing presentation and the scope you covered in such a short time. And as a woman who began her education in a segregated setting in the late 70s, it's amazing that, I was moved to a regular school setting and have degrees and so forth. And it just wouldn't have happened without the advocacy of my parents and teachers at the time. And it's so good that we're now moving beyond those settings. I did want to also thank you for mentioning the crucial work of WIDA and the unswavering commitment that Carolyn Tremata had to ensuring that this was a genuine process. And thank you for acknowledging all of our work that we've done to that end.